Hi there, welcome to a podcast from the MS Trust. This is Multiple Sclerosis Breaking It Down. And this is a podcast where we aim to bring together a range of voices from the MS community, where we look to cover all aspects of life with MS. So what we aim to do is feature a combination of expert advice, real life experiences, to provide an in-depth insight into the impact that MS can have on you and your life. And I'm Nick, and I'm joined by my co-host Helena. How are you doing, Helena?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited today because we're going to bring on our guest. We are joined today by Corinne, who is part of the MS Trust Helpline. She's been on the podcast before. Hi, Corinne.
Oh, hi, Helena. Hi, Nick. How are you? You okay?
We're all good. So Corinne has joined us here because we're kicking off this podcast, which is a bit of an MS Awareness Week special. It's on the topic called MS Unfiltered.
Yeah, and this year, just like we did last year, actually. So we were working with 6 other major MS charities. So we're working with the MS Society, MS UK, Overcoming MS, MS Together, MS National Therapy Centres as well, to talk about some of the things that can be seen to be sort of taboo or very sensitive in MS. And our campaign, you might have seen it online. It's called MS Unfiltered. So have a look for that. Make sure you search for that hashtag. We'll make sure we show that in the show notes as well. And if you want to get involved too, we'll have some more information on that. But please feel free to join the conversation online too. And Helena, there's lots going on in this episode, which is really great to see. So we're joined by 3 of our guest ambassadors, and so later on we'll also be joined by neurologist Agne Straukiene, Trishna and Richard as well from the MS community. And as I say, they were all of our ambassadors too. So they've been working with the MS Trust for a bit. And we'll be talking about some of those trickier subjects, some of those topics where there's a little bit of stigma around them. So yeah, we'll dive into that shortly.
Yeah, and MS has got such a wide variety of different symptoms, but some of them are a bit easier to talk about than others. Have you perhaps ever felt embarrassed by issues like bladder control or sexual dysfunction? If you have, you're not alone. So this MS Awareness Week, as Nick mentioned, we're working together with the other MS charities to try and break this stigma. And we want to get people to talking about all the symptoms of MS, not just those ones that we can feel a bit more comfortable talking about.
Before we dive into our conversation with our 3 ambassadors, we are joined by yourself, Corinne, from our MS Trust Helpline. And you're going to tell us a little bit about how you might help with some of these sensitive topics.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. I think really one of the main things I'd say is no question is a bad question. You literally feel that you can ask us anything. And one thing I would say is that if we don't know the answer directly, we could try to get back to you as well. So if there's something you want us to look up, but even if it is one of these taboo subjects that's a little bit more embarrassing to talk about, we have heard these things before, and like Helena said earlier, MS, there are so many different symptoms. So it's not that, we've heard about a lot of them before. Even if you think you're embarrassing yourself, we're used to talking about these things. So, just don't be afraid to ask the question, and we'll do our best to, certainly to help you out. And I think this is will be a really useful podcast for people, because it's the issues of the sort of things that we hear about in the helpline are things like incontinence, both bladder and both bowel. People don't always want to talk about those sensitive topics, but there are things that can be put in place just to help that everyday living and help you lead a normal life, really. Also, sexual dysfunction, things like that are going on. Sometimes people call us and say, oh, could this be related to MS? It can be these sort of feelings where you feel little bit embarrassed to talk about it, even if with your GP or MS nurse. So, don't be afraid to ask us, and we're used to talking to people about anything, really. So, this is great, this unfiltered idea, because no question is off limits, and it, it's great to just be open about things and talk about things. Really, that's the main thing.
Yeah. You've given us some examples of things already, Corinne, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess you get to deal with a lot of these type of questions. And I guess people not only use the telephone, but people ask it over social media as well, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think when we've got our MS Trust Facebook group as well, which is a useful community. So if people feel confident in approaching that community to ask other people with MS about, what they think about these difficult topics or difficult questions, they can post in there. And also, as Helena knows, you can post anonymously as well. So it keeps it a bit more private, and then you can get some feedback without sort of everybody knowing your business, or not knowing too much. So and or put it in an email as well. So on the helpline we receive things by phone, by email, or by the MS Trust Facebook group. Occasionally we get TikToks now, Nick, don't we, as well? But yeah, no questions off limits. And I would just wanted to say, Helena, just to say about the helpline, it's open from 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. We're closed at the weekends, and we're closed on public holidays. And the phone number is 0800 032 38 39. Okay. And if you want to call up over the weekend and leave a message for us, then we'll get back to you on a Monday morning once we've got your voicemail through and we're back in the office. Okay. But yeah, don't feel any questions off limits, and hopefully that will help. And feel free to talk. It's good to talk about things, as they say, isn't it?
It's very, very true. Thank you so much, Corinne. And we'll link in the show notes on how to get in touch with the helpline. So if you have a question, you might be able to talk to Corinne or one of your lovely colleagues. But now I think it's about time that we dive into the topic of MS Unfiltered with our guests, Agne, Richard, and Trishna, to ask them about all of these things.
Hi everyone, welcome back. So we're really excited today because we're joined by not one or two, but actually with 3 MS Trust ambassadors who are giving up their time to talk to us today. So we're really, really happy about that. So before we get started, I wonder if I could just throw to each of you just to introduce yourselves. So Agne, as you're first on my screen, would you like to tell us who you are?
Hello everyone, I'm a consultant neurologist based at Tower Bay and South Devon NHS Foundation Trust. I am ambassador for MS Trust, as you already heard, and I'm also a host and founder of Be Well with MS podcast.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, we like listening to that one as well, Agne, so thank you. And I'll throw to the next person on my screen is Trishna.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Trishna Bharadia. I'm also an MS Trust ambassador. I was diagnosed with relapsing MS in 2008 when I was aged 28, and I do lots of work with lots of different MS charities and within the MS community, trying to help to improve the support services and the information out there for people who are affected by MS. I'm looking forward to the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Trishna, and we'll throw to yourself, Richard.
Yep. Hi, my name is Richard Sprenger. I'm a video journalist at The Guardian, and I have had MS, or was diagnosed at least, in 2015, which makes it 9 years. That's all I have.
Amazing. Yeah, as I say, we're really excited to have you all with us. And the topic today that we're talking about is that unfiltered, those sensitive areas of MS. So as I say, we do really appreciate that you've come along to give up your time and also to raise these important issues with the community as well. So the first thing that we kind of had to talk about was work and MS. So if I could throw to yourself, Trishna, have you had to have any sort of conversations in your employment about your MS?
I was, when I was diagnosed with my MS, I'd already been working for my then employer. I'd already been working for them for 4 years. I actually ended up being at the same company for a total of 19 years. So when I was diagnosed, for me, it wasn't actually a conscious yes, no decision to tell them. It just felt very natural to me. They already knew that I was going through tests and things. And I felt confident to be able to say, look, this is what it is. But I was also quite naive, I think, because I didn't ever think that there could be any implications, because, you know, like I said, they knew me well, I knew them, and they had been always really understanding about my MS. Along the way, during the length of time that I was there, I needed to have reasonable adjustments made. I don't actually like that term, reasonable, because I'm thinking, well, who actually decides what's reasonable or not? But that's what they're called legally. And so I asked them whether I could have flexible working hours, in order to help manage my fatigue, which has always been one of my main symptoms. And I also was able to start working from home, and this was way before the pandemic. And so, yeah, I started working from home initially a couple of days a week. And then as my MS symptoms progressed, it then became 3 days a week, 4 days a week, and then eventually I became a permanent remote worker. And I think the important thing for me was that there was always an open and transparent dialogue. I was very open about what was affecting me, what could make a difference, what could help. I'm now self-employed. Like I said, I'd been at the company for 19 years, but I'm now self-employed, which has pros and cons. So I'm able to manage my workload according to my symptoms, and able to do things as I'm able to. And the only person I really have to answer to is myself, which is strange after having worked for an employer for so long. It also has cons. So if I don't work, then, you know, I don't have the security of things like sick pay. But it's, you know, it's one of those things which I'm learning as I go along, and also sharing my experiences with others. There's a fantastic Facebook group all about MS and work. And people share experiences on that. You can ask for support and help, and I found that very helpful. So I've had two different experiences, really. You know, one as being someone who's employed, where it was, you know, fantastic, but also now self-employed, where, you know, like I said, there are some pros and cons, but overall it's been absolutely brilliant, and I'm really enjoying it.
Thank you, Trishna. Yeah, and I guess that's one thing, isn't it, that we kind of think about as this sort of taboo subject, is talking to your employer, or being, you know, embarrassed to tell them about what your situation is and your health. But also for people who are self-employed, you know, they might be having some of those conversations with clients or customers,
Yep.
or you know agencies that they work with, and that's a completely different side to things
Yep.
as well.
So one thing I think has helped for me is, so in my self-employment, I actually work as a patient engagement consultant. So I'm working within the healthcare space. And I think in a way that's made things easier, because I'm talking about health all the time. And so part of my work as an advocate is that I'm very open. And so it's been actually, I think, probably easier, because the people that I'm working with, i.e. my clients, they're all in the healthcare space already. So many of them know about MS, they know about other conditions. So I've not felt I've had to sort of delve too deeply into explaining things, which I think has definitely helped a lot. And I feel comfortable about being open about my symptoms, about things that will help me if I have to make a meeting later on in the day because that's what suits me better, or earlier in the day because that's what suits me better. I will tell people, look, this is to help manage my fatigue levels and my other MS symptoms. And generally people have always been very understanding.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, and Richard, have you had to have any of those conversations? I know at the moment you're employed probably by that same employer, but have you had to have any of those conversations where you didn't feel 100% comfortable, and it's something that you were shying away from, or that you might struggle with? Have you had any of those?
I suppose I've also been lucky in the sense that I work for an employer who does sort of take these things seriously and likes to think of itself as an equal opportunities employer, which means that it simply has to kind of walk the walk, I suppose. I wasn't in a position to hide my my MS as many people can, because of course it for many people it can be a very internal issue, and I think that is a lot harder because you have to start a conversation from zero perhaps, whereas for me, because my walking was deteriorating to such a degree that it became quite obvious there was something up, it greased the wheels a little bit, I suppose, in terms of actually speaking to my employer and to my manager and sort of explaining what was going on. So that was probably a blessing in disguise, really, because it just meant that you had to be quite open from the beginning. And I completely agree that if you're able to be open and you're able to have direct conversations and have a good working relationship with your superiors, it really helps, because hiding it and having to feel like you're worried about what will happen to your job if you're not able to speak about it, I think is a totally different ballgame, and incredibly challenging, on top of all the other challenges that you'll be facing around the time of diagnosis, perhaps, or around the time that the symptoms are particularly difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks so much for sharing as well, Richard. And Agne, in terms of sort of your position on this as a health professional, if anyone's listening to this and they're worried about talking about their MS at work, is there anything from a health professional side that you can support with?
Yeah, I've seen so many different scenarios over the last 8 to 9 years, people having no support and super powerful support in the workforce and workplace. In the UK, the Equality Act 2010 requires employers to make reasonable adjustments for employees with disabilities, including multiple sclerosis. And as neurologists, we are here to assist and support, provide comprehensive medical reports detailing how MS can affect patients' job performance, and we suggest some specific workplace accommodation. It might include flexible working hours, ergonomic office equipment, modified duties and shifts, changing the time. I think it's really affecting people who do night shifts. From my experience, it disrupts the whole biorhythm, and there is a lot of more fatigue and unhealthy lifestyle behaviors for people who works nights. So we can advise on how to approach these discussions with employers and emphasize the collaborative approach, because that's how you achieve things better in this life, and finding this sort of practical solutions that benefit both the employee and employers is the way forward. But I had recently some stories at work that, because of the balance and coordination issues, ataxia as we call, people work and they drop things and they sort of have to buy things for what they dropped and broke. And I was had to listen to these stories, and I'm not quite sure whether there is a good understanding of this condition by the employers. What is it, MS? Maybe they just heard about this condition, but raising awareness and bringing that awareness in the community is our role as ambassadors, as MS Trust, as a charity, as me, as a Be Well with MS podcaster. Just to bring that awareness. It's not just at that sort of shallow level. We want to deep dive for people to understand what it's like to live with this. condition because it's invisible. It is not visible. Loads of symptoms like fatigue, tingling, cognitive sometimes problems not necessarily are obvious when people start their new jobs. So I think it's important to talk about this, and as a clinicians we do support, and we write various different letters to the managers and employers to describe the in concrete terms the situation individually for that particular person.
I was going to say, just picking up on that, I think what you've said, Agne, is really important, because it's not just people don't understand, is that people think they know what MS is, because they might have heard about something to do with MS. Or, and I've come across this a lot, people think that they know what MS is because they know somebody else with MS, and don't realize that it affects everybody differently. And so just because they may know somebody who has MS, it doesn't mean that your particular MS is going to look the same. Which is why it's so important that those individual conversations happen. And as you said, that employers are given the opportunity to really understand the whole spectrum of different symptoms, and have the information that is out there, so that they can sort of apply that to people's individual circumstances, because lots of people just don't realize just how much of an individual condition it can be.
Yeah, I never met anybody the same. Everyone is so different. And I think as we are moving towards the personalized management treatment pathways, we also have to give advice at the personalized level, to the employers. We should apply the same rule as we do in our clinics. If we want to help people and make their lives better with having them, full quality in their lives. So work takes a lot of our time. We spend more time with our colleagues than we spend with our families these days, because of the nature of the lives that we're living. So really, having that environment that is supportive and makes a lot of sense to the individuals, and the people with disability can still contribute to the society and to pay taxes and all that jazz, it sort of makes the whole community in balance.
I mean, I think I'd like to think anyway, the general landscape around sort of disability more broadly is being more widely understood at a kind of work level, and people are more open to realizing that these reasonable adjustments have to take place, and legally there is precedent here, and slowly kind of I think a lot of organizations are kind of reviewing, I suppose, to some degree, how their entire operation is able to facilitate kind of different abilities and so on. But even with kind of being open and being, I'm very happy to, all my colleagues know I've got MS, and I'm happy to speak about it if anyone ever asks me any questions, which largely they don't. But the specifics, like you say, they won't know, and so you do have to kind of be constantly explaining the various sort of minutiae of your own symptoms, and some of them are kind of the embarrassing or the taboo ones that just kind of have to be out there to some degree. And so I personally sort of get a lot of practice, and perhaps we'll talk about some of this later, in talking about certain things that I would otherwise definitely never mention, because you're in a situation where constantly it's kind of having to be addressed to some degree. And that kind of general knowledge, like you say, about what MS is and how it affects the different people, that's not going to be there. And so people might be willing and open, your managers might be willing and open to hearing that you have certain problems and you need to do certain things different way, but you will need to kind of constantly be saying, well, there's this, and now this is happening, and of course it's evolving, right? It's changing, so, and it comes and goes, and people aren't going to have that in-depth knowledge of your specific situation unless you tell them.
Also, I think I would like to add here that people have right not to reveal their diagnosis to the employer at the interview or when they start new jobs, so it's people's choice at the end of the day. It's not you know, that what worked for Richard, Trishna, is not, you know, it's not maybe going to work for another person who doesn't feel that wants to reveal that information, you know, as yet, for number of reasons. And I think there is a fear as well, losing the job. That, you know, people with MS have that inside, that they feel like it's not going to be taken seriously, or is going to be taken too seriously, that they're going to be pushed to leave the job, you know. So I think these kind of unspoken things do happen in real life, you know. And I think it's a choice at the same time, as I truly support Richard, that we really want to people be open-minded and share, because what's not get expressed gets depressed, and you have to live with it and hide, and it's extra layer of an anxiety that you may just create by yourself, by hiding and not revealing things. But I'm sure that in this world there are some scenarios that people can't tell, and it depends which country we are living, you know, whether it's Europe or America or the UK. I think that varies as well, you know, what happens at the workplace. And yeah, we need to be very supportive. And I think maybe running a program for the managers, or some sort of a workforce or employers, some educational models to understand MS, and get that message across, that nobody is the same, everyone is so different. And what, you know, if you know a neighbor that lives with MS is one function and one capacity and ability, it doesn't apply to your maybe employee.
So I would say that the two most important things, if you're somebody living with MS and you're worried about your work situation, I would say the two most important things is, one, arm yourself with knowledge around what are your rights legally, what are you entitled to, and what protections do you have, and know that sort of, and if you need to have help doing that, there's plenty of support and out there from organizations. So know what your rights are, but then also know what information and support is there. So for example, it might be peer support, it might be support from your neurologist, it might be support from organizations like the MS Trust, so that can give you the confidence to potentially have those possibly difficult conversations. I always say that the more that you know about a situation, the more confident you will then feel about approaching something, because you're not going to be surprised by anything that might then be thrown at you. And I think it is important to remember there is support and information out there. So you're not on your own, and you don't have to face these conversations on your own. That there is help and guidance there.
Always refer to Equality Act 2010. That's a powerful document. Print it out, go to your manager, show it.
It's really good advice, and we'll make sure we link to any of these things that we're talking about in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, everyone. And if I could move us on to now another taboo subject that people often struggle to talk about, and that's relationships and sex with MS. Richard, I know this is a sensitive topic anyway, but I've passed to you if I could first. Have you had any experience talking to your partner about your relationship and sex in relation to MS?
Yeah, I mentioned a moment ago that sort of a lot of these things that are quite taboo come up at work. This one hasn't, funnily enough.
I was wondering. Yeah.
Probably for the best.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, it will undoubtedly change kind of these things. And I think again, it's always best if you can just kind of have open and frank conversations. But that clearly isn't going to be the case for everybody. And I think it's probably changed my own sort of relationship in kind of ways that are really hard to, because none of it exists in a vacuum, right? So there are always kind of other elements at play, and I think it's really hard to kind of ascertain, well, what is changing because of the MS and because of the way that you're viewed and the way that you're able to do things and your physical abilities. And some things, again, will come up because they have to, because you can't hide it even if you wanted to, and others will kind of are much easier to sweep under the carpet. And I guess, you know, in terms of relationships, it's always going to be a case of how functioning your relationship is as to whether this feels like sort of something that can be easily discussed. But I think even in the most functioning relationships, it's not the sort of thing that you'll have any practice of discussing openly and frankly. And I think it is really hard because we don't practice talking about this stuff in public ever, because these are very private issues that remain private, and you know, and so we don't perhaps often have the vocabulary and to articulate what these issues are. I mean, I'm still coming to terms with the fact that when I look in the mirror and see this you know, able-bodied, attractive young man who everyone is falling in love with, that person isn't seen by anybody else and probably never has been. I'm still coming to terms with that as a thing. So I think, you know, it's very difficult. I don't know if I have any advice though for people as to how to kind of broach these subjects beyond whether you have a kind of a relationship that you feel comfortable doing so. If you don't, I mean, maybe it's a difficult relationship and that's a whole other problem. But yeah, that's not very helpful, is it?
No, but
I mean, this
one's very helpful.
But look, this is I think this one is the really tricky one of all of them, because it's hard enough to sort of speak to someone who you're incredibly close to about these things. Much harder to obviously speak to the world at large, because it just doesn't come up and it's not something that we talk about very much. And so I feel like other things, even, you know, I'm more comfortable talking about than this, but because I don't sort of know how to offer anything that's useful to other people. Things do change, right? I mean, you know, I'll stop talking now.
From a medical perspective, I would like to add that sexual intercourse is a normal physiological process, as much important as eating and doing various other physiological things in this life. And I helped numerous amounts of men with erection problems and women with various different other issues, decreased libido and discomfort during the sexual intercourse because of the maybe menopause and premenopause issues that women starts lacking the level of estrogen and require some extra creams and rings and etc. etc. What I would like to emphasize here that there is help. And if as a patient you're coming to the clinical appointments and you're scared, or you got this sort of embarrassing feelings to express yourself, what is the underlying issue? Because these kind of things have a lot of impact on your relationship. So it's sort of, it's not just you, but it affects your family dynamics, your partnership that you're currently in. And not explaining to the medical team, you will never get any help. And there is help around the corner, and it's very, very easy to fix things if there is an issue with a sexual life. You know, we sometimes refer to the urologists and they do various different assessments. You know, there are some anatomical problems, there are some other to MS issues that causes, you know, whether it's a bladder issue, whether it's an actual erection problem, you know, there are some, you know, medical conditions that can be addressed and managed adequately that improves the sexual life. And yes, MS does affect the erection in men and does affect in women libido, and there is no interest in having sexual intercourse. But as much as there is a physical problem, there is also a psychological problem, you know, and these two goes together. So we have to bring that awareness and understand the processes and discuss that and talk that openly and make it normal topic, normalize that sensitive. It's not that something that you would go and talk to strangers and discuss that at the dinner table, you know, these kind of sensitive topics. But you know, as a medical professionals, we see our people in our clinics, and we never look at you as a John, Mary, I'm just picking up random names here, but we look at you as, okay, this is unity of the biological process. This is the symphony of the instruments playing the music. And which instrument is not performing well? How can we adjust, and how can we holistically look after this part to give that quality, to give that sane, to feel confident, to increase the self-esteem living with this condition and having these sort of symptoms that are linked to MS, and not necessarily to MS. There are some comorbidities that causes big time and trouble for men and women equally the same. But if we are not discussing that in our clinics, we're missing the opportunity to get some help and fix it.
I feel like there's obviously MS related changes that might happen, but in a relationship, of course, there is two, maybe even more people involved, and there will also be changes in how you are perceived potentially as you kind of you have sort of more kind of issues related to the MS, and I wonder, because that's a little bit more knotty and a little bit harder to kind of unpick, is kind of how the relationship naturally changes as you become the person who you weren't previously, or you know, and how your view changes as well.
Also, there is an aging process involved, and in a relationship as a connection with another person. You know, what relationships are we forming with another person? You know, maybe there is no issue with a physiology and you know, or anatomy, but maybe it's to do with the dynamics, and we are sort of we are getting into that sort of, you know, what is a healthy, nice relationship between 2 or 3 or 4 people, you know, and maybe more, as Richard said, you know, and how does that impact, you know, and affect us, you know, and how does that affect our quality of sexual life?
I wasn't about to suggest that a polygamous relationship is something I have vast experience of, but you know, I'm just trying to speak to the wider community at large.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, everyone's raised such good points here, aren't they, about normalizing things. And I know this is very easy for me to say, he's someone who doesn't live with MS, but having those very open and honest conversations in your relationships, and also being able to, you know, bring that up with your health professionals as well. And Agne, it's really interesting listening to you that actually, you know, you want people to bring this stuff up if it's bothering them and it's affecting their lives. You want people to talk about it, and it's as you say, it's just another one of those you know, I can't remember the phrase that you used, physiological processes that everyone, you know, goes through. So yeah, absolutely, thank you. And in terms of, Richard, you mentioned some of the other taboo subjects that are maybe slightly easier to talk about. We're going to move on now to bladder and bowel issues.
Excellent.
Yeah, I knew that's what you were waiting for, actually. But yeah, obviously we know people who live with MS. A lot of people are going to struggle with bladder and bowel issues, and it can really affect their day-to-day lives. So I'm wondering if I could pass to yourself, Trishna, and ask you, have you had to change anything in your day-to-day life due to bladder or bowel issues?
So because of my MS, I've experienced bladder issues and still do. I also live with irritable bowel syndrome. So although I don't have MS related bowel issues, touch wood, I have bowel issues because of living with IBS. And it has affected my day-to-day. As anybody who lives with bladder and bowel issues, it's something you can't get away from. And I've had to make adjustments, some of which are quite, you know, they would be, I think, recommended by healthcare professionals. Others which definitely aren't recommended, but they're things which I've had to do in order to feel comfortable and to manage. Because, and I think this is something that we also have to remember, is that we're not just our MS. In many cases, we may be living with other conditions. So one of the things which has made my MS bladder issues and my irritable bowel syndrome bowel issues even harder to live with is that for many years, I've also lived with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, which means that using public bathroom facilities, public toilets, is really, really difficult for me. And so I had to do things like, so if I'm going out, I reduce my liquid intake, and I'll try and make up for it once I get home. I've altered the kinds of things that I eat and drink. So for instance, I won't drink tea at night, because if I do, I'll be up during the night, constantly going to the toilet, because tea goes right through me. But I love my cup of tea. So the other things are, yes, checking where the toilets are, being vocal about needing to have plenty of breaks during meetings. So sometimes some of the meetings that I'm attending, you know, even virtually, can be 2 or 3 hours long. And I'll look at the agenda and I'll think, oh, okay, well, there's actually not enough breaks in here. And something which for me is also really important, whilst I don't currently have mobility issues, so I can quickly nip to the bathroom. If you do have mobility issues, it might take somebody much longer to go to the bathroom. So it actually really annoys me when people put into the agenda of a meeting 2-minute comfort break, because for many people who are living with all types of, you know, different kinds of disabilities, 2 minutes might be the amount of time it takes them to get to the bathroom, or even longer. So I've become very vocal about these things because, and I think this has come up lots during our conversations, the more we talk about things, the more we normalize it, the more that we're open, people won't be surprised about, you know, oh, you know, it's not just Trishna saying again, you haven't put in enough toilet breaks, or, you know, that this is too long, or, you know, you've chosen a location where the toilets are too far away from the meeting room, and that kind of thing. I think we really, if somebody is comfortable about talking about it, then I would just say talk about it as much as you can. Because in that way, it does become a normal thing to speak about.
I love that. Yeah, that normalization, and it's what you were talking about there in terms of the comfort breaks and people just not having that understanding of inclusivity, isn't it? And, you know, someone's maybe made that schedule without giving that a second thought, and actually just small changes like that can make such a difference for so many people. Richard, would you like to add into any of this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is obviously something that I suppose I have sort of personal experience of it well, so I'm very happy to talk about, because it comes up every day on a kind of an almost hourly basis that you need to address it, right? I mean, for me personally, I have experienced kind of a greater urgency, I suppose, with my bladder over time, and it's come on sort of fairly gently, which is obviously good because it allows you to kind of get into the swing of it a little bit. I mean, obviously regulating your fluid intakes and learning kind of what goes through you and roughly how long you've got when you've had a big drink is pretty useful stuff. On a day-to-day basis, I tend to know where my nearest loo is, which is obviously really helpful when you're doing sort of normal daily routine stuff. But anything outside of the routine is obviously a bit more complicated. I was recently working abroad, and I was constantly kind of out and about going to different places. And that was a real challenge. And I think about 3 times a day, I was kind of really sort of dicing with death a little bit, not quite so dramatic, but you know, but it was a really urgent situation that was incredibly challenging, and no one wants kind of to be in a situation where that follows its natural course and you're left with a bit of an even more embarrassing problem, I suppose. And obviously sort of regulating fluid intakes and that sort of thing, particularly diuretic drinks, is going to help with that. But I've also, you know, I spoke to my consultant about this, and I was offered some pills that I could take, and I've got them, and I take them around with me, and I don't take them because I'm not yet ready to kind of, I don't know what that's going to look like, and I haven't quite yet bitten the bullet with regard to doing that, and whether I assume that will help a lot as well. And it is, you know, it feels for me personally like it is really coming, and I can see looking further down the line how this will be even more sort of problematic, particularly, I guess, as realistically it sort of becomes a bowel issue and a bowel urgency and difficulties there. And it is, I mean, you know, of course it's embarrassing, but I'm constantly having to say to people, particularly in environments that I'm in where which I don't know. I mean, it's all right when I'm at home or at work, I know exactly where the loo is, but I have, you know, I'm constantly having to break off and say, I'm really sorry. I've suddenly become incredibly urgently needing the loo. Can I please use the loo? Or I'm sorry, just give me 2 minutes. And, you know, I think, and I'm really happy to say to people, this is why. I don't know why it's sort of easier to talk about some of this stuff, perhaps just because it's the reality and because you kind of have to some degree. And I sort of try and make a bit of a joke out of it, so as to sort of make everyone not feel too embarrassed about the whole thing. But you know, what are you going to do otherwise? The alternative to kind of saying I really need the loo, I have to go right now, is definitely sort of more embarrassing.
I hear you completely. And I wonder if we could throw to you, Agne, to sort of talk about some of these issues and why they happen, and any tips that you might have as a health professional.
Imagine the nerves in your body as the wiring in a complex, highly sophisticated control system. It's your central nervous system, and bladder and bowel function is narrated by the brain and spinal cord. So there are two areas that would send the signals. And living with MS, in MS, the wiring gets damaged, as we know, because of the demyelinating process. And it causes signals that control the bladder and bowel function to misfire and not transmit at all sometimes. And this disruption can lead to symptoms like increased urgency or incontinence, or both at the same time. Some hesitancy as well, that people go to the toilet, they try to wee and they can't. And also people get some constipation and bowel incontinence too. So I think it's a very debilitating symptom living with MS. And I guess maybe sometimes, again, people going to the MS appointments and not revealing that information. I think what's important overall when you go to see the neurologist, always write it down before your visit and list the symptoms and how they affect your daily life. And this can sort of be a sort of a discussion point, because it will make people's lives easier, people's with MS, as well as the clinicians' lives easier, because you know that this is important and it's not going to be missed because you wrote it down and that's your discussion. And I guess what you could do, you could just have this sort of a phrase like, I've been having problems with my bladder, or I've been having problems with my bowels. It's a straightforward, and it frames the issue in a common way that your doctor is familiar with. You know, we're not surprised by this because we studied hard to the point that we know what the symptoms of MS are, and it's sort of expected for us. You know, so I know that 50% of people that come to see me, they have bladder issues. If they're not mentioning that, probably is not an issue. But if, you know, and then I'm not necessarily going to focus on this area to help you. But again, there is always some help that you can get, immediate help with the medicine, tablets, Various different devices, interventions, injections, Botox injections, catheters. Depends on again, we try to personalize that journey for the individual by assessing the anatomy, the underlying cause. Yes, MS is a common reason, but there are, believe me or not, so many other issues that we discover in this journey when we try to understand the bladder or bowel issues. And I think it's that sort of openness, and remember that you're not alone. It's important that as a healthcare provider, we are trained to discuss without judging, without judgment at all. Like, we look at you as a biology, as a unit of the cells that forms the organs, and then we know what to do to help you with the organ function, that it would function appropriately. Not always there is a success stories, but there are some challenges. Medicine has got a limitation. Very much depends what's the underlying cause. But I guess if you are still feeling embarrassed and not very feeling confident bringing these topics during the clinical consultation, so maybe consider bringing a close friend or family member to your appointment for some moral support, because somebody may just sit next to you and say, look, she's feeling embarrassed, but I would like to talk, if it's okay with you, talk on your behalf and explain. So I get numerous amount of family friends coming and actually adding on information, which I see that there is a hesitancy to sort of express, because people feel a bit vulnerable, insecure. They don't want to look poor, they don't want to be they want to be like you, they want to be fit and healthy and express the wellness, in the clinics, but they can't, and then sort of there is a silence during the consultation that their relatives brings that on the plate and say, look, this is what's going on. Can you help? Of course I can. When we know our enemies, we know how to fight. I always use that to my patients. It's very easy, to be in denial and sort of say, oh, nothing is wrong with me, and let's try to help yourself. You probably can help yourself to certain degree and extent, but some medical intervention is required to optimize your health, to give you that nourishment, to give you quality, to boost your esteem, self-esteem, and give you confidence in yourself and in the healthcare providers.
Over the years since my diagnosis, every time I've met a consultant, they've always sort of asked me these questions, and these I suppose taboo questions. Any changes sexually, any changes to your bladder and bowel, and of course, to begin with, it's always very easy to go, no, that's fine. No, but I think what it does do is it helps you kind of get into the headspace that sometime in the future that question might be a yes. And so the first one for me was my bladder, and I could sense it coming on, and I was able to deal with it because it was coming on gently. But I was like, yeah, there's something changing there, and I'm kind of, and it greased the wheels a little bit in terms of kind of answering the questions in a more open and more positive way, just to kind of have the experience of being asked it over and over again over a period of time. Certainly for me.
One thing that we sometimes get asked about at the MS Trust is illegal recreational drugs. Now, obviously our standpoint would be to always, follow the laws in the UK when it comes to drugs and what's safe to take and what's not safe to take. But sometimes people will come to us and they'll ask us things about, cocaine or ecstasy. And to a certain degree, there might not be that information out there that how will drugs like that affect their MS? Will it affect things like their disease modifying treatments, for example? Do you have any insights on this?
Yes, of course I do. Very strong opinion here. Recreational drug and use in MS patients can pose a very, very significant risks, including exacerbating of the symptoms and also potentially interacting with disease-modifying therapies, the biologics that you are on for managing MS disease activity and progression. So, for instance, cocaine can lead to very severe side effects such as cerebral bleeds and hemorrhagic strokes. It does increase the risk of having ischemic strokes, cardiovascular factors such as MIs, heart attacks, in particular dangerous in multiple sclerosis. And other drugs like ecstasy can cause dehydration, exacerbation of the fatigue. You're not sleeping, you're just draining your battery on empty, and it also reduces the effectiveness of disease modifying therapies. So it does complicate the whole treatment and the whole management. Bear in mind that you may take other symptom management medicines such as pregabalin, gabapentin, baclofen, and the rest for symptom management, and it does interact with these symptom management list of medication, and it's crucial for patients to be very transparent about their drugs, that illicit or recreational drugs that they're taking, and that needs to be revealed to the healthcare providers. And if you want a comprehensive advice and to withdraw and stop using these recreational drugs, there are some specialties and teams looking after people who's got drug addiction. We can always refer you to the teams, and you may get the best support ever, but you need to be ready for that. So overall, it's not safe. It does diminish the effectiveness. It causes various different other collateral symptoms living with multiple sclerosis. But I prefer the openness, telling truth, and finding the way to support and help you, because you know already, if you're using the recreational drugs, you know already the harms and dangers associated with these drugs. It's not normal to consume these drugs at all. And I think that you may have other reasons, and I may not know. Usually it's an impact on your friends, like, you know, it's just being in contact with the wrong people, getting access to these drugs. I think it's the whole complexity involved, and there are some mental health issues as well, and anxiety, depression, that people try to cure themselves or treat themselves by using recreational drugs, which doesn't make any sense from the science and medical perspective at all. And people who are using recreational drugs, they require a lot of help in the community, and I am always here to assist my patients and help. And I'm sure other neurologist colleagues are also very prepared to listen to your story, your concerns, and find the way to help you.
Trishna, could you tell us about any experience of cultural stigma or taboos that you've experienced related to MS?
Yeah, so if it's not obvious, I'm of South Asian heritage, so Indian heritage. MS isn't well known or understood in the Asian community. So traditionally, and Agne, you may concur with this, within medical circles, MS has been seen as a Caucasian disease, and so it's not very well known that Asian people even get MS. I know plenty of people who've said to me that it actually took them a long time to get a diagnosis, because their neurologists were saying, oh, it can't be MS because Asians don't get MS. So awareness within the Asian community is very low. And then that's compounded by the fact that there is generally a lot of stigma and a lot of prejudice that is attached to chronic illness and disability within the Asian community. So people generally don't talk about it. It's very much, there's a lot of cultural ideals that suddenly become become at risk because of some of the things that MS can bring. So for instance, you know, you might be seen as not being perfect anymore. Lots of people believe that MS might affect their marriage prospects because they're not perfect, in inverted commas. People are concerned it might affect your ability to have a family, because family within the Asian culture is extremely important. You know, your you know, the ideal is that you grow up, you get married, you have lots of children, and you know, you have a steady job, and you know, you earn money. Those are all things which are very important within the Asian sort of cultural sphere. When those come under threat within the Asian community, basically lots of people just sweep the MS or disability under the carpet. So they don't talk about it. There's a concept of karma. So I've had people within the Asian community tell me that I have MS because it's my own fault. God is apparently punishing me for having done something bad in a former life. So this lack of understanding can make getting a diagnosis and make that the empathy that you really need with something like MS, it can make it very difficult. There's also a lot of misunderstandings around certain symptoms. So for instance, you know, I've mentioned in terms of my bladder and bowel, I've altered sometimes the way the things that I drink, or the way that I drink, or what I eat, and things like that. Well, refusing food or drink, if you go to an Asian person's house, is considered really offensive and really rude. You know, we welcome people with food and drink. And so, you know, and things like fatigue, you know, I've had to miss out on, you know, for instance, family occasions because my fatigue has been so bad. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to an Asian wedding, but they go on forever. And, you know, and having to sometimes miss out on things like that. Sometimes, you know, within the Asian community, they question whether you're living up to your responsibilities, for instance, or your duties. And all of this makes it very hard to really, I think, be able to live in a way that you feel that if you're going to be open about your MS, it makes it hard to live in a way that you feel that actually the community will be welcoming for you, that they will be supportive. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so involved in an organization. It's a national support group that actually works under the umbrella of the MS Society. And it's called Asian MS. And it was specifically set up to provide culturally sensitive support and information, because we realized that this was needed. We need other people from within the Asian MS community to be able to be sharing their stories if they feel comfortable. One of the reasons I'm so public is because I'm not just a woman with MS. You know, the age at which I was diagnosed, I was in my late 20s. I wasn't just somebody in my late 20s diagnosed in my MS with MS. I wasn't just somebody who was working and being diagnosed with MS. I'm an Asian person with MS. And that is really important, that I can be visible about that, so that others feel that they're able to either come to my, for example, my social media channels, find support, be able to have those conversations with their own family and their own friends in the wider community. Because, and I'll bring it back to it again, the more we talk about this, the more that we're open, hopefully we'll be able to reduce some of that prejudice and stigma that is attached in many different ways to living with something like MS. And as I said, within the Asian community, that, in my experience and in the experience of many others within the Asian community that I know who live with MS and disability and other chronic illnesses, it's very much heightened because of those cultural ideals that are very much held within the Asian community.
Thank you so much for sharing, Trishna, and it's such important work that you're doing. We'll also make sure that we link to the group that you mentioned and any other resources that can help people who are experiencing some of those similar situations.
So quickly, maybe I could just add that I had discussions where patients have expressed concerns of being perceived as weak or dependent due to the cultural stigmas associated with disability. For example, in some cultures, discussing neurological disorders openly is discouraged, as Trishna has just shared, which can lead to very much isolation. And isolation is a killer. As we know, it can worsen the outcomes living with MS. And I think in these cases, we have to work collaboratively together and empower through the education, providing patients with information that they can share to educate their communities. And I think this is what Trishna has been doing, and it's thereby challenging misconceptions and gradually reducing stigma is our ultimate goal.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Trishna's just left there because she needs to run to another appointment. Just like to say thank you to all of our guests today. You've been amazing. Thank you for giving us all of your experiences and your insights.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting to speak.
Absolutely.
If we were a commercial podcast, here is where we might have a break for some adverts. But as we're a charity, we don't do that.
And our website, mstrust.org.uk, has got so much information about all of these topics that Nick and the guests were talking about. So there will be things about work, and there will be things on sexual dysfunction. There will be things about bladder and bowel. If you just head to our A to Z, you can just go and click on it on whatever topic you want to find out more about. So you just head to mstrust.org.uk and click on the A to Z to read more. Oh, I was really jealous that I was in that podcast for about 5 seconds, and then my internet cut out. So I was hearing what you were saying, but I wasn't on screen anymore. But gosh, it was a lot of information to take in what everybody had to share. I found it was it's so much, really. I mean, you could have done this podcast for what's like one of those super long ones, like the most popular podcast known to man. I think he goes on for a few hours in some of his podcasts, doesn't he? And I think we could have done this as well, because it was so much topics to cover during a short time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, we're sorry we missed you, Helena. You joined us for a bit, but unfortunately technology wasn't playing ball, was it, for us on that one? But yeah, no, it was great. I think all of our guests were just brilliant and had so many things to talk about and different experiences. And you're right, like we could have talked about one of those topics, like work, for example, work and MS. We could have talked about that for an hour. We could have talked about, bladder and bowel issues for an hour quite easily. And actually, it was really good, I found, having that, that the differences between, like people in the MS community, like Richard and Trishna, like going through their experiences, and then having the health professional side of things from Agne as well, to give some of those tips and sort of practical advice around some of those things too.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the last few podcasts that we did, well, not the previous one on women's health, because we did have a guest with MS. Then we've had the Bladder and Bowel podcast, which we didn't have a person with MS representing. And it is interesting because you do get a different view from this, because it's very easy for the health professional to sort of say, oh, come and talk to us, it's I won't bite, it's all fine. But that still doesn't really get over that hurdle if you're sitting there thinking, I really want to talk about it, but I just don't feel like I can. And it can, like Corinne said at the start, there isn't really anything embarrassing. There is no problem talking. It's just that kind of mental hurdle to do it yourself. And I think, sometimes it might be easier to just put it in an email if you have a question. Or, like we talked about at the start, put a question in anonymously in the Facebook group, because sometimes just to sort of get the support from the MS community to talk about, well, actually, this is what I did when I kind of psyched myself up to go and talk about it. And I think it's quite nice because we recently done the podcasts on bladder and bowel, and we have podcasts on sexual issues both in men and women, and we've done one on work, and we've done stuff on cognition. So if any of these topics that we discussed today have sort of affecting you, go and head over to those podcasts and have a little listen as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's more sort of in-depth information on sort of, the causes and treatments for some of those things as well, isn't there, Helena?
Yeah.
And of course, make sure you head over to our website if you are looking for some, very specific information about one of those topics.
Yeah.
Our A to Z is a great place to start to give you that sort of base point. And I think, just from what you were saying there, Helena, about some of these topics being really difficult to talk about, we know from some of the research that we've done as a part of our charity group. So when we've been working for MS Awareness Week with some of the other MS charities, the number of people who don't seek medical help due to embarrassment is much, much higher than we would have thought.
Yeah, I found some of those stats that we got around it, which we can link to as well. But there was several people that are actually hiding their symptoms from their partner as well. So not only from MS health professionals, but they don't actually want to tell their partner if they're struggling with things. And I think that can be really, really difficult, can't it? Because if you're hiding something, generally you will not act out, but you might be misfiring your energy somewhere else. So if you're trying to hide that your symptoms are getting worse or something, you might get angrier, so you might snap easier. So there's family and partners, we generally understand that maybe something's wrong, but they don't know what is actually the root to it. So I think it's so important to talk about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are wanting to talk about some of these things, if you do want to share your story online on social media, we do have our campaign that's happening at the moment. If you're listening to this over MS Awareness Week, which runs from the 22nd of April to the 28th of April, make sure you join a conversation with the hashtag MS Unfiltered. If you do want to post about that, if you do want to share a video or a picture, tag us, tag one of our other charity partners. We'll make sure we link to everything down in the show notes as well. I think it is so important, Helena, for anyone who is ready and wanting to sort of spread that awareness. Obviously, if you're not ready and you don't want to talk about some of these things, there's no pressure to do that. But if you are ready and you do want to join the conversation and you do want to get the message out there that there are these symptoms, there are these issues that are really difficult to talk about, and probably the wider community probably doesn't know about them.
Exactly.
This is a really good opportunity to get involved.
I think that is a really good point as well, because MS Awareness Week is obviously about raising awareness of MS, perhaps not so much just to the MS community, because we already know quite a lot about it, but also to the wider community. And talking about these topics, under the hashtag of MS Unfiltered, might make people actually realize that some of these symptoms that are often hidden disabilities actually are a big part of MS, because often when people talk about hidden disabilities, they mention things like fatigue, but the bladder dysfunction, for instance, or bowel problems could stop you from going outside because you're too worried about it. I mean, I will share that I often struggle because I like running, and me and my son went to a park run last week somewhere else because we were on holiday. That was why my internet was cutting out before. And that park run did not have a toilet. So I was worried the whole time while I was there. I mean, I tried not to sort of drink too much before I went. I didn't have a coffee, which I always love having in the first thing in the morning. I went over there, and it was a lot of those kind of stresses that were there because I just did not want to have an accident while I was there. And that nearly stopped me from going out. And I think, there's a lot of people that worry about these things. And the more we talk about it, the more we talk to the wider community about these issues, people will be aware of them. And then maybe that park run would kind of think, oh, actually, we should try and have some toilet accommodations for people who come to visit. Did I stand up and say, excuse me, I have MS, I want to use the toilet? No, I didn't. Maybe I should have done that.
Yeah, but it's that thing that Trishna was talking about, wasn't it? It was that inclusivity and spreading that awareness so that more facilities can be, more places can be accessible for people, you know. And you know, if from listening to this podcast and getting involved in the campaign, if suddenly you think, actually, you know, I've got that thing that's been playing on my mind that I haven't talked to anyone about and I haven't asked anyone about, you can, of course, get in contact with our helpline. As Corinne said earlier, it's open from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can leave us a message, of course, outside of those times as well. And we're also not open on UK bank holidays as well. If you would rather not call, you can email us as well, and that's ask@mstrust.org.uk, or you can drop us a message on one of our social media channels. If you did want to call, it's 0800 032 3839, and of course you can find that information in the show notes as well.
And as Nick mentioned there, you can find us on social media. So that's on Facebook, YouTube, X, TikTok, and Instagram. This podcast is available on Spotify, Google and Apple Podcast, and Amazon Music, and lots of other places that you would normally listen to your podcast from. The video is up on YouTube. And lots of other videos, actually. We have recently updated a lot of videos that have to do with bladder and bowel tips and things. So go to our YouTube channel and have a little look. Give us a follow, and give this podcast a follow, and give us a review. We would love that. Finally, I just want to say again a big thank you to our guests today, Agne, Trishna, and Richard, which are our lovely ambassadors who does such a great job of raising awareness about the MS. And of course, the always lovely Corinne from the MS Trust Helpline. Thank you so much.
Bye.